Hi everyone, this is Tanya from Flying Dog Studio. Thank you so much for joining me as I add my third installment to my Impressionism sketchbook. I'm really proud that I am on installment number 3. We are using the Caran for this one as we have the others, and let's take a look at our colors. I have dark green, umber, white, light gray, and yellow green, lemon yellow, light olive, dark olive, and I have these separated for a reason. There's russet, violet, and that one is ochre and sky blue, and that one is vermilion, and then I have orange. As far as paintbrushes go, I have a size 2 and a size 8 from that Royal and Langnickle Zen series. Those are my round brushes. And then I have 1 cup of water and then my little miniature cutting board that I use as a palette and a microfiber cloth. And again, you can use any kind of cloth you want. I just happen to have a microfiber cloth. This is how I'm going to start the piece. I'm not going to draw it out ahead of time. I'm just going to go straight with those Caran Neocolor IIs and kind of sketch it in. I actually forgot to put that behind. If you're working in a sketchbook and you don't want color to get underneath on the bottom one when you paint or when you're coloring, it's a good idea to add paper underneath. I forgot, but now I have added it in. So I'm going to do this just kind of skipping through the steps here. You can see the colors that I'm picking up, and you might have guessed if you've watched either of my other 2 installments in this series, I'm doing some sort of a landscape, and it probably involves flowers. You can tell by the colors. My colors are getting kind of used. These are kind of getting worn down, and that's because I'm using the same colors. These are like my favorite colors. So I think I've used these Caran enough that I can kind of pick out what my palette needs to be. So what I'm doing with this palette now is building up the shapes and the colors. I want a good background base because this is Impressionism. I'm not worried about the detail. I just want to get a good background, and we're going to put some water on here in a minute, activate all of these so that I can build the other elements on top. And I chose a reference photo for this piece of Impressionism from the website Unsplash. Again, they do not sponsor me in any way. I just love to use them because they are a website of freelance photographers that allow you to use their work free of charge as long as you give them credit in whatever you're using it for. So you're going to find that down in my description below, along with a link to Unsplash. They also have an app. They're on the App Store, so you might check the App Store, but I'll have that photographer's name listed down below along with the website. So I have added all my colors here, and I'm just wanting to activate them. Right now I'm using my size 8 round to kind of get between everything and blend it together. And again, I've speeded this up and I'm skipping a few steps in between so you don't have to watch the whole thing of me just activating the colors. I'm not being really careful. I'm allowing them to just mix and blend together because this is my base. So once I get this done, I am going to blow dry it before I add any more color on. So you're going to see that after it's been blow dried. I'm not going to put that up on the screen. So I'm doing that off camera. I'm going to blow everything dry. I'm making sure this area kind of blends together, and I know I'm lifting a little bit of color. I have switched to a 3/4 inch brush that holds a lot of water because that allowed me to move everything out around a little bit more. Now I'm coming back on top with some of the same colors I used previously, and I don't know if I've already mentioned it, but one reason I picked this piece is because it had such a contrast between the background and the foreground. And you're going to see what I mean, and you probably can already tell once we get a little farther along with the piece. But the background was a deep, dark, woodsy, and then there was a field of just flowers. Now, this was a larger piece, but because I'm working with a almost square format, and I didn't want the whole thing on there, I wanted to concentrate on just a square of it, I have zoomed in to the portion that I want. So I'm going to keep on with what I did previously. We're going to do this a couple of times, and then we're going to come back and add some details. And just remember, every time you see me add the crayons, I have used a hair dryer and I've dried it between these layers. So I'm going to be quiet now. I'll let you watch me paint, and I'm going to hop back on in just a second. I did want to hop back on and mention that I have switched brushes to my Windsor Newton. This is my mop brush. It's a flat brush. I can't remember the size on it, but I really like this brush. I switched because it gives me a softer edge, holds a lot of water, which is what I needed, just like that 3/4 inch from the Royal and Langnickle series. But this brush gives me a little softer edge. So you can see everything has been softened up quite a bit. So that's why I switched to this brush. Now this is my third pass with adding the crayons in that background and in the foreground before we really start in with semi-detail so that you can see the actual flowers. I'm not going to call it detail because I'm not working with a detailed piece, but to add a few more of those foreground elements. So I'm really working on that background. I need to make it super dark. So this is my third time to add the colors, and now I'm going to get off and I'll hop back on in just a second. All right, we finally have, after the third pass through here, the background completely done. And I wanted to show you something very sad. I broke my crayon. I had just bragged, and I shouldn't have done that, but I had just bragged on these crayons in the last installment. And I talked about how I have dropped the set like twice now, and none of the crayons broke. But this one just like popped off, rolled right off onto the floor, landed on absolutely nothing but the floor. I do have a wood floor in my house, and it broke in half. I was so sad. But I wanted you to notice how if you use these more like oil pastels and crayons and really add that color on top. So I've used it as a watercolor, and now I'm putting these on top, and they are really super bright. They really stand out on that dark background. I was really impressed with that on these. So I'm adding the white. I know a lot of artists say you should use the white of your paper, but in this case I really can't. And I do that sometimes, but it kind of depends on the situation. And in this situation, because I wanted to go ahead and put a background on everything, I couldn't really use the white of my paper. So with these, you can lift them some. So I could have lifted that in the background, but these are a little bit darker in the back, and I wanted to add them on like this. Now I will come back with a smaller brush as we go along and activate these. These are just kind of the preliminary flowers. This reference photo had flowers that were blurred out. Most all of them were blurred out, and then a few in the foreground that had a little more definition to them. So basically all I need to do is find these little dots of color and add those into the field. So they're going to look really bright right now because this is a pretty white field. There are a lot of white flowers in there and the greens are really subtle. And it was at this point, adding the flowers, I realized that I forgot to add a color to my palette. So the color I just showed you is purple. It looks more like fuchsia, but it's actually a purple. And I realized I had not pulled that color. So you're going to see me adding that in. And there are some of these colors that I add on top of each other to create the flowers that were in the background. Now, there were some flowers that I didn't quite follow along with what was in the photograph, but I kind of made my own. And but that's okay. I mean, you can take artistic liberties with things. So that's what I did on this. So I'm just going to be tapping, and you can see I keep my rag handy because I don't want a lot of water. So as I go between the colors, and I've mentioned these in other videos, I will do like the yellows, and then I might go get the pinks. And if I need some more yellow and I don't have yellow in that area, I'll still have enough on my brush. I can go and tap that area. You'll see me doing that too throughout here. But every time you switch to another color, don't keep using the same brush with the color already on it, because these colors really soak up in that brush. That's what allows me to add them on in areas where I haven't painted that color already. It's still loaded in my brush. So rinse your brush every time you go to activate another color, unless you're wanting those colors to blend together, because they really will. It will transfer that color where you do not want it. So we have just a few more brush strokes here, and then we're going to switch to that different technique that I'd like to use, which brings in that plastic cutting board palette from Walmart. And you can see I'm using the back of it. That is texturized, and some of you may have seen me do this before. I'm taking the colors I need for that field of flowers, and I'm rubbing them on there, and then I'm going to come back with a little bit of water, not a lot, because I want these to be a little more saturated in there. And you can see it really pops on that dark background. That's what I love about these. There are so many ways to use them. You can even paint with them straight off the crayon if you need to, kind of like the Derwent Inktense pencils. I do that with those as well. You can do that with these. So that's what I'm going to be doing on this. I'm going to be going back and forth, and you're going to see me using tapping motions. So I'm going to get off again. I'm going to hop back on as we get closer to the end and finishing this up. I think of this particular step I just did with all of the dotting of the colors in as like my second step in the piece. So the first step was really working with the background and building that up, and that took 3 layers. And then we put like the second step in, which I kind of think of the second layer, and that's a little more definition and giving us some more texture that we really need for an impressionist piece. And now we are working on like the third step, which is bringing a little more, I don't want to use the word detail, but a little more definition to the foreground. So we have our background, kind of our middle ground, which is our second step, and now we have our foreground, which the flower I'm working on right now, that was a very tall flower, and it was actually in the foreground, but it was blurred out slightly because it was bending away from the camera. So it was a very interesting photograph, and that's why I picked it. I love the colors. I love the contrast. And I'm just working now with drawing some of these stems in. I have painted these before, and you could use a smaller brush. I could have used my size 2, but I wanted them to be a little more defined. I will pick up that size 2 and activate the colors on these. I seriously thought about just leaving these as more of an oil pastel and not activating them as a watercolor, but I do activate them, but not entirely. You'll see that they have a little more aspect of the oil pastel to them. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm going to need some more white in a minute, and you may see off to the side slightly, I do have that little paint well that I have sharpened one of these white crayons into when I needed to sharpen it. I didn't want to lose product, so I have a little paint well I'm going to be using to get some final details and add some white in. That allows me to paint with even more saturation than putting it on a palette like this, because I have the little paint well that I can just get the paint out of, add water to my brush, and it makes it like thinned acrylic, and it works beautifully for adding some more of these details. you can tell that that paint well really helped us out with that white, because it allowed me to put some of those white flowers that were in the foreground. It allowed me to define those even though we have a white background for those to lay on. It was a lighter background, but it still allowed me to bring those to the foreground. So we have just a few more defining brush strokes to make here, and then this piece will be finished. So thank you so much for joining me. As you know, I'm always happy when you're here. I'm always happy to find out where you guys are from. I appreciate every single one of you. I hope you'll follow along with me as I try to add another piece to my sketchbook every week. If I have it figured out correctly, I have one page for every week for the rest of this year. So I'm hoping that's going to work out. Again, I'm so proud that I have done actually 3 sketchbook pages, because I'm not a sketchbook person. So anyway, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you will join me again. And until then, I will see you in the next one.